Your stencil is your blueprint to a successful tattoo. Without it, you're tattooing blind. By the end of this video, I promise you're gonna know everything that you need to know about printing a stencil. And if you get value out of this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and without wasting any other time, let's get into the video. So to print a stencil, you're really gonna need 3 or 4 different things. I'm gonna walk you through each of the things that I have and explain what they are so you know exactly kind of what to do. First things first, right now in front of me, we have the thermal printer or stencil printer. This is gonna be the printer that I have used for the past 8 years in my career. I like it better than any other printer that I have used. This one, I feel like the stencils come out the darkest, and the paper that is used, I feel like works the best. This printer, you can get off of Amazon. I'm gonna leave a link to it in the description below. Next up, we have the stencil paper. This is gonna be the stencil paper that we're going to use. It is Spirit brand. This is gonna be the brand that I recommend everybody use. I've never had really any issues with it. I'm gonna go over some pros and cons of using this paper with this printer so that you guys know the best way to go about printing your stencil, designing the design. For this Spirit stencil paper, I'm going to recommend everybody get the 8.5 by 14. They also sell an 8.5 by 11, but the 8.5 by 14 is a little bit larger, okay? So it's a little bit bigger than a full length of paper, as we can see here. I think overall works better for me, just because sometimes I'll be doing a little bit of a bigger piece that takes up the entire page. And sometimes in the printer, if you have a 8.5 by 11, the design can get cut off. So having a little bit of a bigger sheet for the stencil paper is going to allow you to not have that issue. With this stencil paper, there's going to be a couple different layers to it. The front, this yellow piece, is going to be a protective layer that helps protect the main portion of the paper that's going to actually be what transfers your stencil onto this white sheet. This brown sheet is going to be what's referred to as onion paper. And what you can do is you can take this and just throw it away. And then this yellow sheet, I've seen people do this a little bit differently. I'm going to walk you through kind of how I go about doing it. So this yellow sheet is what holds the actual stencil paper and this white paper together. So what I do is I hold it at the top where all of the papers are connected, and I go ahead and rip this paper off, okay, because it's not really needed. And then you have your stencil paper pretty much set up and ready to go into the stencil printer. For this printer, I'm gonna go ahead and plug it in. Once you plug it in, you know, you make sure obviously you put the power cord in the back, and then there's a button on the side. You're gonna turn it on. You should hear it turn on. There we go, little beep. And then there's a couple different options on this printer. So you have mirror, photo, deepness 1, deepness 2, the stop, and then the copy, okay? The mirror is what is going to mirror the design so that it comes out pretty much looking like exactly how it is on the paper. So if you wanted to flip this design, you would just hit this mirror button and turn it off. If you want the design and the stencil to come out exactly how the design is printed on the paper, you will turn this on. Photo we don't really use. Then you have deepness 1 and deepness 2, and this is going to affect how dark the stencil is and how dark it is when it transfers onto this white sheet of paper. I usually keep my stencils on deepness 2. I've seen other people use deepness 1. I kind of go back and forth depending on the design and the stencil that I'm trying to print. Definitely stick around to the end of the video just so I can go through the pros and the cons of this printer and give you some tips so you're not taken aback by when you're trying to print a stencil and it doesn't print out the correct way. So definitely watch to the end, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe so that you can continue to see more tips and tricks when it comes to tattooing and tattoo education if that's something that you're interested in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this up, okay? This is the roller that will feed out or help the paper roll out of the stencil printer. And like I said in the beginning, I've seen a couple people do this a little bit differently, where they take the yellow paper and put it in, and then pretty much it ends up coming out this way. So people will put this paper in this way, and I'm gonna tell you why at the end of why I don't recommend doing that, okay? So I'm gonna take this side of the stencil paper, and there's a little slit right here, a little opening that you're going to run this paper through, and you wanna make sure you have the white side of the stencil paper facing up towards you, okay? You don't want it to look like this because you won't get the transfer of the stencil. So I'm gonna slide this through here. I'm gonna come around to the back, slide it all the way to the very edge and the top of the paper. Press that down, okay? We have that in there. You want it to be pretty centered, and you want this to be as even as possible, okay? Once you have that in there like that, you're pretty much ready to take your design and start printing, okay? So we're going to put the design in facing away from us, and we're going to put it in this little slot right here. You can see a little paper icon. You're going to just take the paper, put it in there, and you should hear it grab the paper. All right, so now it's in there. I can't really pull it out. It's a little bit snug, right? What I'm going to do is I'm now going to hit the copy button. And as the stencil is transferring, I'm going to hold this paper and just kind of guide it through, okay? And I'm kind of pulling on it just a little bit. Once you see your design has fully transferred, you can hit the stop button and then slide your paper through. And this is where scissors becomes very important, because you need scissors to cut the design out. So I'm now going to cut along the bottom of the design. So now I have my stencil cut off of that paper. I can remove this thermal paper, and then now what I'm going to do is just cut around the design. Okay, sometimes depending on the area that I am tattooing, I will cut little slits into the design just so that the stencil wraps a little bit better around the area. Okay, and then that is how you pretty much print your stencil. Now, I'm gonna throw this paper away, and you can see that you're still left with the remainder of this paper. Okay, you might need to readjust it a little bit, open the lid and then close it back down, but you're free to come back and then just continue to use the rest of this paper. A lot of people that I've seen online, and even artists that I've talked to, they'll put it in the other way and they'll have the design all the way over here. But you end up wasting pretty much the rest of the paper if your design is small. So to me, it doesn't make sense to put it in that way. It makes more sense to put it in the way that I showed you, this side first, coming to the very edge, and then that allows you to preserve paper, because this Spirit stencil paper is not cheap, you know, it's pretty expensive. So another big tip when using this specific printer, because there's other printers where you're able to do this, is you always want to make sure with your stencil that you have just an outline of the design. You don't want to have a stencil that you're trying to run that is solid black like this, which I'm going to run it through here just to show you what happens if you try to run a design that has too much solid black fills within it. This printer can't really print out designs like this. You have to get just an outline, and sometimes you're able to get by with small little fills. If you have like a couple little spots that are filled in, you can change this from deepness 2 to deepness 1 and try to print it, and like you can print it this way or print it the opposite way to see if maybe that helps it run through a little bit better. But to show you what happens if you were to try to take this design that's filled in black and put it through here, let me just make sure this is good. Okay, we're gonna make sure the design is facing away from us. Okay, we're going to press copy, and we're going to do the same thing. Try to run it through, hold it, pull it, tug on it a little bit. So we can see the paper is getting stuck and it's trying to run, and you'll end up hearing that noise. So we're going to hit stop because we don't want to break this printer. And we can try to pull it through, but it can't get all these black areas. So it's never going to be able to print that stencil. You have to get a clean outline of the design. And I usually tell my apprentices, it's better to get an outline like this, because in my opinion, it's easier to run your lines that are clearly seen on the design than it is for you to try to run your lines up against the solid black edge. So instead of you running your lines against the solid black edge, it's gonna be, first of all, the stencil, it's gonna be harder to see your lines when you're running the lines. And then because it's harder to see your lines, you may make more of a mistake somewhere. So just to prevent that, be sure to get an outline of just your design so you don't run into that issue and that you have an easier time using this stencil printer. Another pro tip for you guys, if you are on a budget and you can't afford this stencil printer, you can get away with just buying this paper. And what you can do is you can run the stencil entirely by hand if you want to. I don't normally recommend it because you're not going to get the same, it's gonna take a lot longer for one, but it's also, you're not gonna get that same thickness and bolder like lines if you don't use this printer. So let me get a pencil or pen. Another thing that you're not gonna have is you're not gonna have this kind of paper that's easier to wrap around the body part that you're tattooing. You're going to just be transferring your design onto this printer paper. So what you would do is you would lift up your paper. You wanna make sure you're on a flat surface. And then what you can do is you can simply just trace over your design and just slowly take your time. And if you need to, you might have to go over the lines multiple times just to make sure that the line is pretty dark. But when you do that, what you can see is on the other side, you can see the stencils transferring over to the other side so that you can use the printer paper that you have as your stencil paper, okay? I see a lot of artists, if they do like black and gray realism or portraits, what they'll do is they'll actually prefer, instead of using the stencil printer to print your designs, they'll print out the reference and then just do the stencil by hand, because you can sometimes get caught up in the little details when you're using Procreate or some type of design tool and get too caught up in the details. So to prevent that, they will just do it by hand. So that's one way to go about doing it. Now that you have your stencil, your next step is going to be putting that stencil onto fake skin so that you can practice tattooing. I made a video on it so that you can check it out and you know exactly what to do and my tips and recommendations on placing a stencil on fake skin. So definitely go check out that video and I'll see you there.